Going on, APUSH peeps? So you're wondering, what Supreme Court cases do I have to know for the APUSH test? Lucky for you, I just broke down the new curriculum. If it's in the curriculum, it's in this video if it's related to the Supreme Court. So make sure you are familiar. One quick note, I have detailed videos on virtually every case that is mentioned in this video in the description, so make sure you check that out as well. Before we begin, it's shout out time. I need to give a huge shout out to Mr. Armstrong's class at Cerritos High School, Ms. Bell's class in Connecticut, Mrs. Beichner's class, Mrs. Cowell's class in Laguna Beach, California, Mr. Proudfoot's class in New York, and Mr. Z's class in Chi-Town. Best of luck to you all. Thank you for watching. You will do great on the exam. All right, let's start off talking about this court in the early 19th century. Key concept 4.1, Roman numeral 1, letter B states, Supreme Court decisions established the primacy of the judiciary in determining the meaning of the Constitution and asserted that federal laws took precedence over state laws. So, what court case established the primacy of the judiciary in determining the meaning of the Constitution? You know it, one of the most important court cases ever, under Supreme Court Chief Justice John Marshall. It is Marbury versus Madison, and this established judicial review. My buddy Nick, make sure you know this. It established judicial review. Now, the Supreme Court ruled that it is emphatically the province and duty of the judicial department to say what the law is. That's from Marbury versus Madison. John Marshall in 1803, and this allows the Supreme Court to declare a law unconstitutional. Know it. Now, the second part. What court cases asserted that federal laws took precedence over state laws? Well, continuing with John Marshall, here he is, the Supreme Court Chief Justice. We have Gibbons versus Ogden from 1824. This stated that Congress has sole control over interstate trade, not states. So interstate trade is trade between two or more states. If there's trade between two or more states, that is Congress that can regulate that trade, not individual states. Another court case from 1819, we have McCullough versus Maryland. The Supreme Court said, guess what? The bus is constitutional. The Bank of the United States, Alexander Hamilton would be so happy if he were alive. And the Supreme Court stated that states cannot tax federal agencies. So Maryland was trying to tax the Bank of the United States. Supreme Court said, nope, can't do it, bro. That's a federal agency. Federal laws are more powerful or took precedence over state laws. Key concept 4.2, Roman numeral 1, letter C. Legislative and judicial systems supported the development of roads, canals, and railroads. What court case supports this statement? Well, we got the Charles River Bridge. And the Supreme Court is now under the leadership of Chief Justice Roger B. Taney, who looks strikingly similar to a wet dog. Look at him. You know it. Golden Retriever. You've seen one. That's what he looks like. And the Supreme Court stated that contracts could be altered to benefit the general welfare. So contracts are not permanent if it benefited society. So the Charles River Bridge Company had a monopoly on this bridge. And the Supreme Court allowed a competing bridge and said, hey, it benefits society or the general welfare. All right, we have our first court case that is specifically mentioned in the curriculum from 1857, Dred Scott. Key concept 5.2, Roman numeral 2, letter B states, the courts and national leaders made a variety of attempts to resolve the issue of slavery in the territories. Dred Scott decision, but ultimately failed to reduce conflict. So here we have Dred Scott, who sued for his freedom because he was taken to a free territory. And under Roger B. Taney, the Supreme Court rules the following. 1, all African Americans, regardless if they were free or slave, are not citizens. This will later be overturned by the 14th Amendment. Slaves were deemed property, therefore they cannot be taken away because the 5th Amendment protects property. And Congress could not legislate slavery in the territory. So the Missouri Compromise, which was already overturned with the Kansas-Nebraska Act, that is deemed unconstitutional. And the Supreme Court said Congress had no right to regulate slavery in the territories. Now, this will split the Democratic Party along sectional lines, north and south. And this will be a factor in Lincoln's election in 1860. All right, moving ahead to the late 19th century, key concept 5.3, Roman numeral 2, letter E, segregation violence, Supreme Court decision stripped away African American rights. What court case supports this? From 1883, we have the civil rights cases. And this stated that Congress could not outlaw racial discrimination by private individuals and or groups. Supreme Court said Congress has no right to tell individuals that they cannot legally discriminate. All right, our next court case, number 2 that is specifically mentioned, Plessy versus Ferguson. Number 6.3, Roman numeral 2, letter C. The Supreme Court decision in Plessy versus Ferguson that upheld racial segregation helped to mark the end of most of the political gains African Americans made during Reconstruction. So the impact of this case, there is a phrase that is entered into American vocabulary, and that is separate but equal. Now, all of the justices ruled in favor of separate but equal, but this dude, John Marshall Harlan, he was known as the Great Dissenter because he was against the Supreme Court's decision. Now, you're probably wondering, John Marshall Harlan, obviously this dude was going to be a Chief Justice. His name is John Marshall, for crying out loud. Yeah, that was my thought too. So if we look at this political cartoon from 1904, here is 2 separate cars, one for white folks and a Jim Crow car. And you notice that the South will focus on separate. Facilities were never equal. So this phrase separate but equal, the South will focus on the word separate. And this is later overturned in 1954 by Brown versus the Board of Education, which we'll come to in just a few moments. Supreme Court in World War I, key concept 7.2, Roman numeral 1, letter C. Official restrictions on freedom of speech grew during World War I. So what court case supports this statement? You have Schenck versus the United States, and one of the justices who wrote the majority opinion here is Oliver Wendell Holmes, with one of the nicest, most luscious mustaches you will ever see in U.S. history. So the Supreme Court stated this clear and present danger test, this idea that if free speech posed a clear and present danger, that it could be limited. So during times of war and crisis, civil liberties decrease. And this could be a theme you're writing about in an essay or a DBQ. And your synthesis point could be connecting to Lincoln's suspension of habeas corpus during the Civil War. So again, during times of war and crisis, throughout American history, rights decrease. And this court case, Schenck versus the United States, upheld the Espionage Act, which was passed during World War I. Let's jump on over to the Supreme Court in the New Deal. Key concept 7.1, Roman numeral 3, letter B. While conservatives in Congress and the Supreme Court sought to limit the New Deal's scope. It's important to know not everybody was on board with the New Deal. You have conservatives in Congress and the Supreme Court seeking to limit the New Deal scope or its power or size. So what court cases support this decision? I got a couple for you. 1, Butler versus the United States. This declared the AAA unconstitutional and said, you know what, farmers? You cannot be paid not to grow. Schechter Poultry versus the United States. This declared the NRA or the NIRA, which created the National Recovery Administration, that was declared unconstitutional. See you later, Blue Eagle. You are bye-bye. As a result, FDR is going to propose the court packing plan, but he never had the support to create it. Please pretend this says he and not the. So it's important to know about FDR's court packing plan, his desire to increase the number of justices on the Supreme Court, but it does not happen. Let's jump on over to World War II in the Supreme Court. Key concept 7.3, Roman numeral 3, letter C. Wartime experiences also generated challenges to civil liberties, such as the internment of Japanese Americans. So what court case supports this statement? You have Korematsu versus the United States. This upheld the legality of FDR's executive order of Japanese internment, in which over 100,000 Japanese Americans, 2/3 of which were Nisei, meaning they were born in the United States, were forced to internment camps during World War II. And they were forced there because there's this fear of Japanese American subversion, or the fact that they could be spies. And it's important to note that there's no evidence of any people interred ever spying. And this impact of the court case, again, you know it, during times of war, rights will decrease. Okay, third and final court case that is specifically mentioned is Brown versus the Board of Education. Key concept 8.2, Roman numeral 1, letter B. The 3 branches of the federal government use measures, including desegregation of the armed services, Brown versus the Board of Education, etc., to promote greater racial equality. So what did Brown versus Board do? It declared school segregation unconstitutional. This essentially reverses Plessy, but it only applies to school segregation. And he used the 14th Amendment to support this. So what was the impact? Well, it's a milestone in the civil rights movement. If you're writing a civil rights essay about the 1950s or 1960s, I would absolutely include this. And you see that the South is going to resist this, whether it's the Southern Manifesto, written by 100 Southern congressmen protesting this decision, the Little Rock Nine, in which Eisenhower had to nationalize the military to escort these 9 African-American students to school, or massive resistance, the idea that Southern schools would rather shut down than desegregate. Jump on over to the Supreme Court during the 1960s. Key concept 8.2, Roman numeral 3, letter B. A series of Supreme Court decisions expanded civil rights and individual liberties. So what are some court cases that support this statement? You have Miranda versus Arizona. People must have their rights read to them at the time of arrest. Your right to an attorney, your right to remain silent, which comes from the 5th Amendment. So police officers, if they arrest you, you must have your Miranda warning read to you. Escobedo versus Illinois, this is along the same lines of the Miranda warnings. You have the right to an attorney at the time of arrest. So when you're arrested, you have the right to call your attorney and have your attorney present during questioning. And Tinker versus Des Moines, this deals with free speech during the Vietnam War. Students were wearing black armbands to protest the Vietnam War, and they were suspended. And the Supreme Court said black armbands are fine. That's a form of protest and free speech. They were not disruptive to the educational process, so that is okay. All right, some test tips for multiple choice and short answer. Guys, if it is specifically mentioned, you must know the details of the case. Be able to provide examples of cases that support the statements made in the curriculum. That's the key concepts I was reading to you. And for DBQs and essays, it's likely part of a larger theme. For example, civil rights. And remember, try to connect these court cases throughout history, especially if it deals with a decrease in civil liberties. All right, thank you very much for watching. Best of luck on all of your exams, especially the one coming up in May. You are brilliant and will do great. And make sure you check out the description for other review videos, not just the Supreme Court ones, but massive end-of-the-year reviews to help you succeed in APUSH. I thank you guys very much for watching. Best of luck, and have a good day.